Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reto. Welcome to another edition of Android Developers Office Hours. We hold these every week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So put it in your calendars, and hopefully we'll see plenty of you each week. The aim of today is to try and answer as many of your Android development technical questions as we can. And as you can see, I've got a long couch full of other Android experts to hopefully be able to answer most of your questions. If you do have questions, please post them into the comments on the post that you're viewing this through, and we'll go through as many of those as we can through today's session. We'll also be taking live questions, so if you can join the Hangout, please do so. It's a lot of fun to talk to people in person as well. So we do have a few questions that people have posed earlier to us, so I'm going to start reading some of these out, and I'm putting it to the panel here to answer. First one is from Jared Williams, and he was wondering, what is the preferred DPI would you use for LDPI, MDPI, and HDPI resources? So does that depend on the size of the image? I'm trying to make sure everything scales properly, and he'd like to have some help.
Okay, so by the size of the image, I assume that means the size of the image you're trying to display, right? So that's actually a good question, and I think we document that. Let's see if we can find it here. Unless Roman knows off the top of his head.
So what is the exact...
The preferred DPI, or what's the DPI for, the canonical DPI values for LDPI, MDPI,
Whoa, hold on, sorry.
Yes.
Some feedback. Say again?
What are the actual definitions of MDPI or HDPI?
Oh, okay. So, I mean, if we're just looking for the definitions...
Just in DPI.
So, LDPI is 120, MDPI is 160, HDPI is 240, XHDPI is 320, and those are really the only buckets that we have right now.
Okay.
And actually, a nice little tip there is, if you're going from MDPI to HDPI to XHDPI, the ratio is really 2 to 3 to 4. If you include LDPI, I forgot what the ratio is, but that's one kind of way to remember. It's 2 to 3 to 4 between M to XH. I'm not sure if that was the question. That was anyway.
As far as I can tell, that was the question.
I think that answers the question.
Okay.
Excellent. We've got a couple of people live online, so I'll throw it to you guys. Matthew, did you have a question you'd like to pose? Nope. Chris, do you have a question? Feel free to shout it out.
So Chris.
Okay. Failing that, we'll move on to another question from the comments stream earlier. Let's have a look. David Leganier has some questions about the ICS icons. So he says, I'm still not sure what tools and effects are used to create the standard ICS icons. Are there any plans to create some sort of recipes with Photoshop or GIMP or some other image manipulation software to help developers like him create new icons that would look as much as possible like the stock icons in Holo or ICS? So, as an example, he needs a tri-state button that looks like a check mark, but it's really time-consuming to figure out what effects to use to make it look great using the ICS style.
So tri-state button to look. So icons. Let me just make a differentiation here between icons and widgets. So for icons, we think of them as.
Thank you.
All right. So icons, we really think of them as glyphs. Specific, little graphics that represent some sort of object or whatever, like an action or your application or whatever. And things like checkboxes or text fields, those are more widgets or kind of building blocks as we have in our design guide. And there's definitely a difference there. So we have a lot of good documentation right now around icons. We have a lot of
Sorry, yeah, that's fun. And I just want to, you have to know you're deafening us here.
Okay.
Okay, that works.
Apologies to everyone.
Anyway, yeah, so for icons, we have good documentation. Widgets like checkboxes and things like that, we don't have as much good documentation right now about the exact styling. The latest styling, the latest kind of overall style that that we have documented is on the Android design site. One of the asks, what I just used ask as a noun. Sorry about that. One of the requests was to provide, like Photoshop templates or GIMP templates for, how do you actually create those core widgets, like the text fields or the checkboxes. And that's something that we're definitely thinking about. We don't have any documentation there right now, but it's definitely something we want to address in the future. But back to icons for a second, we do have things like templates. We have an icon generator that's built into Eclipse and available on the web. And we just released a set of kind of core ICS action bar icons on that design site. So look for more in the realm of widgets at some point in the future.
Roman, can you give some URLs? You mentioned a lot of things that are published, but where are they published at?
So Billy was asking where are these all published. We'll post links, of course, I guess in the comments afterwards. But if you just search for Android Asset Studio on Google, that should get you to the Asset Studio, which generates launcher icons, notification icons, action bar icons, and all those kinds of things.
All right, perfect. Let's have a look. So we have so we have a question from Haley Dawson. She asks, can anyone address what is missing from Android ICS that is needed to implement seeing signed attachments through Exchange, or the Exchange APK, not PGP inline SMIME? The issue isn't licensing with Microsoft, but not knowing what needs to be added, so no good examples of that kind of EAS flow. A lot of that's Greek to me. Has anyone here worked with Exchange enough to have any clues as to how you might go about
Yeah, I think it's more to do with the email client that comes on the platform.
So I think that's the question: is
itself.
how could you modify how could you create an app which would fix that? Like, how would you modify the email client?
I do not know. Somebody would need to look at the EAS.
Right. Yeah. For this, you really need to speak to whoever wrote that app in question, and they tend to be a little bit hard to get a hold of sometimes. Generally speaking, though, most of our code is open source, so you can go and take a look at it and browse through that. I'm not an expert on it myself. I don't think anybody in this room is.
I mean, from a platform standpoint, it comes with all the building blocks needed to implement that particular protocol. It's all about implementing the missing pieces at this point.
Yeah, so there's really two questions here. One is how do you implement SMIME, and two is how do you add that to the email app. As far as adding it to the email app, you're going to have to go either write your own email app from scratch or take the code that's already in the Android open source repository, fork that, and then make the changes to your own copy and release that as a new app. So those are the two approaches you can take from there. Understanding that code, of course, you have to spend some time and read through it and see how it's designed. That's not something that is common, so you have to spend some time and actually research how it's built. SMIME itself, there's plenty of good talks out there on building it. It's probably way outside the scope of what we can cover during this hangout. It's a complicated protocol. You have to understand how to generate an RSA signature, how it's attached to a MIME email, the various headers you have to put on there, and on top of that, how to handle UI and display that properly. Generally,
it's a product idea.
Yeah, what you're talking about here is an actual entire product. It's not something that we can cover in 5 minutes, unfortunately.
Cool. Yeah, Haley, if you want to join, the hangout, we've completely missed your point, and you want to ask a follow-up question, please feel free to join us. In the meantime, Matthew Patience has asked if we're going to be taking questions live. Yes, we are. So if you'd like to unmute and ask your question now, feel free.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good to see you.
Good. I had posted it on the Google Plus comments for when you're taking questions, but I was curious, in the Android layout editor, when you guys are making custom drawables for buttons, like different state drawables, for down states, up states, whatnot, are you guys able to actually preview them in the layout editor when you put them in your layouts? Because I seem to have an issue with it. Whenever I try to put the background, set it to this custom state drawable, it doesn't show up in the layout editor as a preview.
that expected behavior, or should we be seeing
Well,
errors come up in the
I think the expected behavior is that you see the default drawable. If you absolutely see nothing, then my guess is that it's either a problem with the stateless drawable, maybe it's not defined correctly, maybe it has no default, yeah, you wanna add on to that?
Yeah, there's actually a bug report for it. Like, a lot of people are having the problem. I'll post it in the chat as soon as I find it here.
Okay. Yeah, and if it's a bug, then I mean that's definitely something that we can look at. I know that we've been making a lot of rapid improvements to the layout editor. I'm sure there are bugs here and there, so definitely take that to the team to look at.
Okay, yeah, it'd be great if that could be looked into. I just, no one from Google has really given a status update on it, and seeing as so many people are having the problem, it might be good to look into. So, oh, here it is.
Is it if you paste it into the comments rather than into the
21046. I'll take a look. Yeah, thanks for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, no problem. I just wonder if you guys have any insight, but I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Let's see, we've got a question from someone in the live chat who doesn't have a microphone. So let's see, it's from Chris Haseman. Let's see, you're seeing seg faults happening while doing some heavy image manipulation in Gingerbread and have no NDK component. So you assume that these are coming from native Android code. Is there anything I can do to track down what's causing these? Let's see, anyone in the room have NDK debugging experience? Well, it's not even NDK, right, because it doesn't have an NDK component. So it's seeing seg faults in the app from SDK code or framework code.
It's actually a seg fault, you're not getting a stack trace. It's an excellent question. I think we need to actually see what the exact error message is there to go and give some guidance.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of looking at the information you have and try and deduce the cause as much as you can. Of course, when you get a seg fault or any native crash, those are always a little bit more tricky to go and track back to see what's causing it. Generally speaking, that means that something, assuming you have no NDK code, that means something crashed in the C layer of the Android OS. So at the very least, it means there's probably some framework bug that you've run into. So if nothing else, go and post a bug report to v.android.com, and then also maybe even copy it to one of the Android mailing lists for the framework team. If you go to developer.android.com, go to the resources tab, there's a mailing list section, and you can find the mailing list for the Android framework team on there, the public mailing list for that.
Cool. Yeah, not a post close. Okay, cool. Hopefully that'll help. What kind of app is it? Like, are you working with hardware or camera or sensors, or is there anything like that which is likely to give you a clue? Processing images from the web.
Is it like processing as in like just fetching and displaying, or processing and doing
resizing around the corners?
Yeah. In general, I mean, what I'll say is, if you're running into that, I mean, first of all, if it's Gingerbread, it's very. I mean, if it's a bug in Gingerbread, it'd be very difficult to to fix it at this point.
In fact, there might be even a good chance we've already fixed it in future releases.
Yeah.
So one thing you may want to consider is applying drawable effects and doing kind of canvas drawing rather than updating the bitmap itself. I mean, this is, of course, if you're just using it for display purposes, like rounding the corners for display. But if you're actually like processing it and saving a new bitmap, then maybe no way around it. But there's definitely kind of drawable tricks you can use to get around having to do this all to the bitmap itself. Drawing it into a new bitmap using a canvas, yeah. Yeah, I look at, so just, again, without some other people in the office have trouble getting into the Hangout, as it's not public. Yeah, so Rita could probably comment, but the Hangout is open to extended circles.
Yes, so it's everyone in my extended circle. So if you can get into this Hangout, then if your friends are in your circles, and they should be able to as well. I think that's true. So you should be able to view it, but if you want to join, then you need to be in my extended circles. Easiest way is if they post something in the comment thread, I can add them as well if they have questions they'd like to ask live.
So the one last thing I wanted to point out about the rounding corners, just for an example of how to do the rounding of the corners using drawable tricks, you can take a look at the IO apps code, and there's this thing called bezel image drawable that basically does like a corner rounding and applying kind of effects, and then drawing it to a canvas. So that may help, but.
Cool. Cheyenne Javed asks in the comments, he says, I should say, that Google is encouraging people to use the action bar instead of menus for ICS. But should we use menus for Android 1.6 through 2.3? He's thinking of creating a custom title similar to the action bar to support all the versions.
That's an excellent question. And Roman, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the answer is it really is up to the app developer. By default, you will just get ordinary menu behavior. If you use the compatibility package, or sorry, the support package, to go and add compatibility to your app, again, you'll still just get standard menus on those older devices. That said, there are a number of open source libraries that do implement Action Bar on those older ones. And if you do implement it, it could give your app a bit more of a modern feel, as well as provide consistency across versions. So there definitely is a good reason why you might want to go and implement an action bar. And I know a lot of people who've done it, ourselves included. So, I mean, I'd encourage you to, but I don't think we have any official guidance one way or the other than just do what you think looks best for your app.
Yeah, and the reason that either one really works there is that users on pre-3.0 devices are really accustomed to using the menu. And they're also accustomed to using the action bar in popular apps. So a lot of the popular apps in market use action bars, so you shouldn't feel like it's strange to use an action bar before 3.0 because there was no formal API for it. That's not really a reason for it. But so really it is up to you, like Trevor said.
Yeah, I think one piece of advice that I tend to follow is if you've already got an app out there which works in a particular way and users are used to some of those earlier platform versions, it can be more confusing to dramatically change things like how the menu works and introducing an action bar for those existing users. So if you're building something new, it may be easier for you especially to build a single consistent UI using something which looks and acts a lot like an action bar, so that when people's phones get updated or they're playing with phones, then it still looks and behaves the same way. If you have an older existing app which used sort of the traditional menu system, to continue using that for the older devices and then use the action bar for the newer platforms. Let's see, Indu, and I'm not going to attempt that surname, says that there are applications out there which store and access data in the cloud. Is there any documentation, or do you have any recommendations on how to integrate the cloud in your application? Is there any particular designs that you should follow when using cloud services? How can you make sure that those apps are performant? It's a pretty big topic. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, so let's go down here. Well,
we have one Android class, right? Published, or no?
We have sample sync adapter addresses the problem of synchronizing a cloud service with data on your device.
Right.
That certainly helps. And then there's an Android U class on doing OAuth, which is also useful. The hard thing about saying anything about cloud services.
Actually, so the one on OAuth is specifically for Google.
Right. It is specifically for Google, but it discusses just the general idea of how you get authorization to use a service and then things like that. Problem with saying anything about cloud services is it could be anything.
Right.
I mean, we don't limit you to using Google services in order to do the cloud service. But basically the things you probably have to worry about are authenticating the device's user to make sure that this person is who they say they are, and then the authorization to say this person is who they say they are, and in addition they have the right to access the type of service they're trying to get to, and then deciding how you're going to transmit data back and forth. You've got some choices. You could do JSON, which you can look up online. There's a bunch of stuff that's been written about it, and JSON's a very easy way of doing things, basically.
Yeah, but a lot of the answers here are going to depend on what your app is trying to do and what the constraints you're working with are. You know, do you have a requirement for real-time data? Do you have a lot of data? Is there only a small amount? You know, what's your authentication model? You know, without more detail, it's hard to go into any really specific tips. Generally speaking, though, from a you know, just as far as your user experience is concerned, assuming you're working with some sort of data that you want to go and you know, pass back and forth in your app. You know, we usually recommend using a sync adapter, going and storing that for offline use. Whenever you make a change to it, so you know, let's take the example of Gmail, right? Gmail goes and syncs all your email messages, stores them locally. When you pull up a message, it's already on disk, even though the canonical copy is on your server. And then when you make a change, it goes and uses an operation to go and update that later on the server as soon as it's convenient. So still everything is stored on the server, but then you're doing everything asynchronously. So that way the user's not waiting for all of these operations which are going over the cell network, which is often slow to go and complete. Or you know, they might not even have a cell connection, right?
So yeah, I would say that you bring up some good points, which are you want to try and do it in the background. You don't want to interrupt what's going on the device, because the user, usually the user doesn't need to have the data almost immediately. They can wait and get some sort of notification. You want to try to not have the user do any specific intervention in order to get it. Like if you synchronize email, a notification comes up when you've got new email. Otherwise, you don't have to do anything. And the sample sync adapter will show you how to implement. We'll give you a pattern for how to implement that, and then from there you might get some ideas of how you want to change things and be able to ask more questions.
Yeah. But yes, I think we can throw tips out all day as far as what best practices are. But again, it really boils down to what is your application and what are the constraints you're working under. So if you're watching this live, please feel free to join in on the Hangout and ask us and give us some more details. And we'd be certainly happy to go into a bit more detail and help you out with that. But I think without more information, we're just going to go and it's too broad of a question to tell you everything.
It's actually not a bad idea to have a specific hangout around using web services and some of the best practices around that. So we'll table this for now and perhaps do something more specific later. Let's see, I've got a question from Moritz Post, who says that when I set my app target to the API level of 3, I can give my application the hardware acceleration equals true flag. On my Galaxy Nexus running API level 14, this does not seem to activate the hardware acceleration. Only when setting my app's API level to at least 14 is the hardware acceleration enabled. I was under the impression that the acceleration can also be enabled on lower API levels by setting the flag to true.
Huh.
Is that true?
Wait, so is the question, how do you turn on hardware acceleration on pre?
No, the question is how to turn on hardware acceleration on ice cream sandwich. The problem they're running, they're setting their target API level to honeycomb, and apparently the flag is not actually having any effect, which I've never heard of before.
Well, I think it's pre-honeycomb.
Oh, wait.
I think when you've got it set to at least 3, then it works.
Okay.
It means API level of 3. But
well, he says on a lower level.
yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and assume that if he has the acceleration equals true flag, but he's targeting gingerbread, then it doesn't turn it on even though the device is capable of it.
Right. That sounds like a bug. I mean, if you have that flag on, that should override. I mean, if you have the flag on for the app, it should override anything else, like involving Target SDK. There may be, I mean, assuming that you're not overriding it in the activity definition, in the activity item in the manifest, and you're not overriding it at the view level, then I mean that sounds like it might be a bug. That's just my guess.
Yeah, I'd agree. Generally speaking, it should work. Something sounds good there, and I'd want to see the code you have in your into manifest and go from there.
Cool. Let's see. Michael just joined the Hangout, so I'm going to put you on the spot and ask if you have any questions to ask us while you're live.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
Oh, wow. This Google Plus thing. So I did post a question to Stack Overflow. It was, sorry, let me reference what I was actually asking because I just joined and didn't expect to be put on the spot.
Yeah, no, we do that just to get you.
So yeah, my question was about Alarm Manager. So we actually have a fairly popular app on the platform. It's called HD Widgets, where I think right now a top 25 paid app. And we have a set of time and weather widgets. And in order to keep the time, we have to sort of hack around the inability to go to the onReceive method in the app widget provider more than 30 minutes. So what we're using is the Alarm Manager to set off an alarm every 60 seconds. But one of the issues that we're facing is that when users clear memory or use a task killer, or if Android decides to kill our app, the Alarm Manager gets cleared and the user's time no longer updates. And we're trying to figure out the best practice to implement this functionality because it's Alarm Manager. Originally, I was thinking Alarm Manager is sort of like a cron job for Android, but now I'm realizing it's sort of dependent on the application, so it's not really. Yeah, do you guys have any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is maybe a service is the right way to do it. Just have a, I mean, assuming that battery is not a concern or whatever. I mean, battery should be a concern, but I think services should be able to handle that, right? Basically, I mean, if your app gets killed, I believe you can have a service that kind of resumes or goes back into its started state.
Yeah, actually, I'm surprised. I have to admit, I thought the Alarm Manager would continue to fire even if the app was killed.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That was my impression of how Alarm Manager worked. So I was like, this seems like the most efficient way to implement something that happens every minute versus having a service in the background and having a broadcast receiver and all that. But I don't know. I guess what would be the most efficient way?
How are you receiving the alarm broadcast? So where is your receiver registered?
So what I'm doing is I broadcast it, and then in the manifest, well, so I receive the alert in a broadcast receiver, and then inside that broadcast receiver, I send out another intent in which the widget is the app widget provider is listening to via the manifest. So that is listening to, for instance, like time updated. Or rather, I send out time updated every minute with the Alarm Manager, and then every time I send that out, I send out another intent that says update time. And then the widget listens for update time, it does its thing, and updates every minute. And I thought this would be the most efficient way to do it because then, when the screen's off or it goes to sleep, supposedly with the Alarm Manager, it won't be active. But as soon as the user is interacting with the system, then the alarm should kick back in. But maybe I just have a misunderstanding of how it works or what it's supposed to be used for.
I mean, and this is every 60 seconds. That was my impression that Alarm Manager wouldn't do every 60 seconds. It has kind of a minimum of 15 minutes.
No, but using an inexact repeating alarm, and you're limited to certain buckets. But if you just, I assume it's a repeating alarm that you're setting as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm setting a repeating alarm for every 60 seconds, and it's not wake up. It's RTC.
Yeah. Right. And so it normally works, but then if the process gets killed, it stops working. Is that the behavior you're seeing?
Yeah, exactly. So if I go and stop and kill my app, the application, the timer will just disappear and nothing will update. We also have weather updating, and we've got a few other things like when listening for different switch states like Bluetooth and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean I guess we could make a service to do this, but I mean, isn't Alarm Manager supposed to work in a way that stays persistent?
Yeah, I have to admit that's kind of how I thought that it worked. So I'm going to have a little bit of a look into that to confirm its actual behavior.
So if you're trying to do something every minute, I just want to say I think there's another intent that the system broadcasts.
Alarm tick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually tried. I was actually trying that this morning, and it's the same issue because I tried declaring it. Or maybe I can declare the broadcast receiver somewhere else, but I tried doing it in the application. Like the application class. Right. And it basically performed exactly the same as Alarm Manager. When the application was killed, everything would no longer.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I think of is the only thing that I can think of that persists, or not that persists, but the system will actively try to kind of restart are services. I don't remember the exact details of which kinds of services get restarted, but that may be kind of the only way you can kind of.
So what you're suggesting is have a persistent or just have it start up a service when my app starts up, and then if the app gets killed, Android will automatically restart my service, and I can kind of, like, maybe I'll restart the Alarm Manager there. Is there any way to check the status of the Alarm Manager if it's still running? Or
as a safety net, in the service, on this Freud call, you require another broadcast if it ever gets killed by the system. You broadcast something and then followed by something else, which will then restart the service.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuances. I mean, anytime you're thinking of, like, things getting killed, there's various ways in which they can get killed. That's definitely one approach.
I didn't quite understand what the gentleman right before you said. Could someone?
Basically, in your services on destroy, to just refire the broadcast to restart the service.
Okay.
There may be automatic behavior that does that.
Will it get so if you kill, for instance, if I just go to the app and kill it, or I use a task killer, will I actually get on destroy? Because I know activities don't even get on destroy, right?
You may not. That's the nuances that Roman was referring to.
Yeah.
You can't really hook in to do something when things get killed because they're not quite going to know when that happens necessarily.
The difference is that I think there are services basically like if a process gets killed and there's a service that was being tracked by the system as being in the started state, then the system will try to restart it. I think that's the behavior that I was referring to earlier.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how that works, but.
What about if Android is we're trying to track down this behavior because we've got just a lot of different user reports that we're figuring out. Some seem to be people using task killers, but other times it just seems to happen randomly. And what I'm thinking is their device is eventually clearing the app from memory because they run out of memory. That's like as best as I can suffice because they're not at least they say they're not physically doing anything, and there's enough reports to make it seem like it's true. So, I mean, how does maybe this just gets into the service life cycle, but if a service gets killed by Android because the system needs more resources, what exactly happens? Like, will the service get restarted? Will I get notified? Like, can I do anything about it?
So you can control that behavior depending on the version of Android that you're using. So by default, the system will automatically restart the service.
Even if it kills it for resource management purposes?
Yeah. So because services are one of the top priority things, it will attempt to restart it. Now, if it restarts it and then kills it again because it still has no resources and that happens a couple of times, then you can end up with the service just basically being off.
Does it only restart the service, or does it engage any sort of application code? Because the service itself would be extremely lightweight, but I'm just wondering how that connects to the rest of the application.
Yeah, so if you have a custom application class, then that's going to get run up as well. So it's going to create your application again. So none of the activities, but certainly the application class. So it
will create the application class again. Okay, well, that kind of makes sense then. Why things
It's important to know that the system looks at your applications your application's components, like your activities and its services, and that's how it weighs priority really. It doesn't look at if you have application code, the system doesn't look at that and say, oh, you have application code running, so I should give you more priority. If you have a foreground service or a foreground activity, that's how you have that priority. So having a foreground service will give your app kind of more priority when the system has to figure out which apps to kind of evict from memory, which apps to kill,
Gotcha. And when you said the foreground service, you need to have a notification icon
Right.
associated with it.
Yeah. And that's really, the reason for that is really, I mean, if you have a foreground service, it has to be important enough where the user, you know, if it's not running, something bad happens for the user, right? I mean, like, for example, music playing, that's a foreground activity or foreground service because, you know, if music all of a sudden stops, the user's going to be like, what just happened? In this case, it's really
music player as well on the App Store, so kind of relevant.
Right. Absolutely. So if you have a music player, absolutely use a foreground service. But you know, in this case, since you're updating a widget, it's really, I don't know if it's designed for that use case, but that's you know, one thing that you can do there.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm thinking is, given what you guys have said, if I just even had a dummy service that had absolutely no code in it, that was just a service that I started, it should engage my application when it gets restarted again. Therefore, if I have code in my application that starts the alarm manager, when the application starts, it should re-engage the alarm manager. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
I'd almost say, I mean, I don't know if you really need anything in your application class. I mean, I've written several apps, and I don't think I've ever, this is a preferential thing, I think Radio can say differently, but you know, in the apps that I've written, I think there's very little code that I've ever put in the application class. You may want to just consider putting this in the service code itself.
That's what I was thinking too. It seems a little odd to go and put that in the app when you already have the service running there.
Yeah. The only reason I mean, it's kind of the opposite now, that's why, because we put some stuff in the application because it seemed to function, basically some listeners, some broadcast receivers for a couple different things, and that seemed to be a nice place to put it because we didn't have to control starting the service because, for instance, like when our app starts and you restart your device, you know, our application isn't actually running. We have widgets running, so running a service, you know, we have to manage the widget starting the service, you know, on enable or on update. So it seems like application gets engaged, you know, either when the widget is seen or when the application is open. So that was sort of the reasoning behind that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. But hopefully that was useful for you. But definitely some of that behavior is a little bit different than I would necessarily have expected.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. Chris has a question. How should I go about animating movement scrolling within list view on devices that don't support smooth scroll? So pre-API level 11. Any tips?
Wait, say it again?
On the screen. I've got a quick. How should I go about animating movement, so scrolling within a list view on devices?
So like smooth scroll too?
Yeah.
There's a couple of ways you can do that. I mean, one way is you can basically have you could do it with a handler. Not a handler. You could do it like by firing a message, just like, you know, having kind of a tight message loop where you basically call scroll to, and then just like refiring the message until your animation is complete. That maybe, I mean, if that's too heavyweight, then no, that should be the right way to do it, I think.
Or alternatively, you could actually just go take a look at the Android source and grab the new implementation of list view that already has smooth scroll baked in, and then just go and copy that into your application.
And another thing is that, like, I mean, the animation framework in 3.0, I mean, I'm not sure if the smooth scroll to implement.
Yeah, if it uses the animation framework, you might be grabbing more than you've asked for. But
right. But the thing is, you can also look in the source code for the animation framework and see how they do it. I'm pretty sure it uses messaging somehow to make sure that you don't block the thread, but at the same time have a pretty fast frame rate.
it apparently uses an internal scroller.
Oh.
Yeah, implement it yourself or just copy that scroller. Either way, whichever one's easier for you.
Let's see, Matthew, you had another question, right?
Yeah, actually. The question came up when they were talking about Alarm Manager. So with Alarm Manager, what would be your best suggestion for handling time zone changes? So if I were to set an alarm that was based on the current time zone I'm in that relates to, say, 8 p.m. tonight, but then I change time zones, how would you suggest I take care of that time zone change so that it still goes off at 8 p.m. in the new time zone?
reset your alarm effectively. So you can, you've got two options. The easiest would be, rather than setting it for a specific time, use the elapsed time alarm instead. So that won't look at the clock time, but the number of seconds since the device woke up or was powered on, I think it is. So if you just set your alarms using that instead, you don't need to worry about time zone changes and time changes. If you want to go the other way and still have it at 8 and let time change to
Popcorn popping?
So another way to do it is the system does broadcast an intent when the time zone changes. So you can listen to that time zone change intent and modify your alarm on the fly based on that.
Okay, yeah, I had been looking into that. I was just wondering if that was the correct way to do it. So I would just cancel my old alarm and set a new one?
Yeah, exactly. If you use the same pending intent, then it will override it.
Okay, cool.
Alright, let's see. And Indio Bogino in the comments has a question about the async task loader. I'm trying to update a whole database with many tables in the background. Since the tables are not linked, is it wise to use a loader which will internally use a bunch of threads or even other loaders to fetch, parse, and manipulate the database, or on loader for each table? So should he be implementing a loader for each table or for the one for the whole database? I guess that's the question.
It's a good question.
For updating, I'm surprised he isn't using, like, what's it called? Apply batch.
That's true. So that might be a better approach than...
Yeah, because, I mean, I'm assuming that, I mean, unless he wants to do these without implementing a transaction, apply batch and a list of content provider operation objects will allow him to do it in batch.
So maybe a good approach would be to use a single loader, but then apply batch to each of the tables which you want to do, so that you're minimizing the possibility of collisions and transaction issues.
Also this is it's for the, I don't think, you may not be using the content providers, it may just be database work, like a SQLite database.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
There's no reason you can't implement the same functionality.
Right.
So the same thing the content provider does, but just implement that as a method within your database implementation.
Yeah, I think, you know, especially on an Android device, I think you want to try and do transactions, because otherwise you don't. I mean, my guess is he really doesn't want to use a bunch of loaders because there's no guarantee of which one is going to execute first. So unless he's doing a bunch of different, or finish first. So unless he's doing a bunch of completely independent things, he would end up having. I mean, there could possibly happen that something would go wrong and he'd have a database in an inconsistent state. Whereas I'm pretty sure that something akin to apply batch, if you use content provider and apply batch, you're guaranteed to have it a transaction. About SQL databases, I just don't know offhand.
Okay. So yeah, I think generally if speed of updates isn't really critical, then you're probably better off going sequentially rather than using a single loader and hoping. I mean, the only real advantage to doing it in a single loader is that it potentially will execute more quickly, but you have the issues associated with concurrent database operations. So probably better off to do them consecutively. Okay, Sohil Mansouri asks, when you try to load a large image and display it into a view, you can get an error which states bitmap size exceeds VM budget. This happens because the bitmap factory decode resource method leaks memory, causing memory leak error. Can anyone explain this to me and how to solve this problem for big images to be loaded into a bitmap?
Well, I mean, hold on, Rita, where are you seeing this?
So this is in the comment thread. But I can point to.
I mean, wait, was it using an image view or is it loading?
Yeah, into a view. So I'm going to go ahead and assume it's an image view.
So I think, I mean, the first thing is, how are you decoding the bitmap, right?
It's using a decode resource method from the Bitmap factory.
Oh, okay.
So there's an inherent
you're
statement
prescaling
that he's suggesting that it's leaking memory, which I don't think is necessarily true. So I think what's more likely is that the size, the amount of memory you need to manipulate the bitmap is exceeding your VM budget, rather than there being a memory leak in the code.
Yeah, Spark, you want to talk about that? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with images that are larger than your view, then you're going to be throwing a lot of data away. So really what I'm doing is, like before you decode your bitmap, you get the bounds of your bitmap, and then you find a scaling factor. You actually decode it into a bitmap that's only just about the size of your screen. And you'll just save a lot of memory that way, because then you're not creating an in-memory data structure that's the same size as the source bitmap. It's much smaller than that. And when I was playing around with photos off the on-device camera, with the Nexus 1, I could only take about 3 photos at full resolution before I ran out of memory. But when I introduced scaling, then it was virtually unlimited.
and the scaling options are in bitmap factory.options, which you can pass to decode resource.
Yeah. So take a look at my article in Android Training about the camera, specifically the photo by intent, the really super simple photos. And you can see some code that takes a JPEG image at full size and then displays it in a view that's just the size of the display.
Okay. Let's see. Theron, you've just joined us. Did you have a question you'd like to ask? No? Okay. No problem. Let's have a look what else we've got in the comments. Let's see. That's a little bit lengthy. Let's have a look. Okay. We have one question here. So he says, assume that I have different customers and therefore have a different UI for each of them. But the content of the application is the same for all of them. So it's basically one white labeled app that displays different content based on your customers. I want to have one code instead of having 10 of the same project, which is fair enough. And through code, say that if it's a particular customer, then load a different drawable, a different resource. So what would be the best way to go about doing that? So one app, different UI assets based on the user at runtime.
Is this like maybe like a theming question? Is it like
No.
Now I know, Alex, you had some experience with implementing a switchable theme for the Honeycomb Gallery app.
Yeah, that was switching pre-existing apps or switching pre-existing themes at runtime was actually not too hard. It does require restarting the activity. You said it was user-based?
So it's based on which customer they're going to go and pick basically a theme, right?
Okay.
for example, like a free member versus a premium member?
Yeah.
Oh,
Does that
okay.
make sense?
Yeah, sure. It does require destroying and restarting the activity. I don't remember exactly how to do it. If you look at the sample code for Honeycomb Gallery, there's a sort of a day mode, night mode button in the action bar that just flips between hollow light and hollow dark.
Right.
This changes the theme for the entire application.
Now again, this is just assuming that you're changing the theme. So this is going to do
Right.
things like maybe recolor your app or change the way things are rendered slightly. Now if you need a completely different UI, again, say like free user versus premium user, and the premium user gets a ton of extra buttons or something more dramatic like that, then you actually have to go and implement different layouts. And in that case, what you're just going to do is just inflate the correct layout once you've determined which user you're working with. So that in itself shouldn't be too complicated.
Same sort of
Unless
thing.
I'm missing something here.
No, I think that's fair. As well, the same general principle works as well. If it's the same layout and theming but different assets, so if you just want to have a different color background or different logo based on the customer or the user type, then I think the key is that you won't be able to do all of that in XML. So that you can't sort of insert an if statement into the XML code. So you would have to apply the backgrounds or the images to image views and those sorts of things from within code. So at the beginning of your activity, just after you've inflated your layout, you want to check, what kind of customer is this, pull the assets out from using get resources, and then apply that to each of your image views or backgrounds or layouts accordingly. I think between those three methods, you should be pretty well covered for any kind of user-based customization. Let's have a look. So we've got a Stack Overflow question that was pinged to us on the comments as well. I'll read it out because it's tiny writing. I want to use animation on my app widget in a loop. I've defined my translate animation via XML and added the repeat mode equals restart on set, but nothing happens. The animation runs once and then stops. According to the documentation, it should be pushed down. Not quite sure what that means, but nonetheless.
Animations on an app widget.
Continue looping, right?
Yeah. So let's see, it's an alpha from 0 to 1 over 2 seconds. So it looks like an animation to fade in over the space of 2 seconds. So presumably someone wants something to sort of pulse on or off in an app widget.
The only animation I've ever seen work in an app widget, and I don't know if this is just a bug or not, but the only animation I've ever seen work in an app widget is in the news, I think the news and weather application that comes on a lot of the Nexus devices. There's a view flipper that toggles between headlines, and that uses kind of like a fade in, fade out animation. But I wouldn't even expect animations to work in app widgets. I don't know if that's supported officially. But.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I'm surprised that you get any animation to work at all. The widgets are pretty tightly locked down as to what's supported, what you can do, and customization is pretty limited. So beyond the view flipper and the view beyond the view flipper, I don't know if there's much that you should be able to do. So it may be a bug, but it's also possibly working as expected.
The other thing is, from a design standpoint, you really don't want to overburden the user visually. You don't want to distract them because, I mean, the home screen is extremely sacred. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say. It's a very sacred place for the user, and anything that feels out of place or that demands too much attention is instantly going to get removed. So just be careful what you do there, and try to be consistent with the rest of the widgets on the screen, with the rest of the icons. And if you're trying to do kind of like an infinitely looping animation, that's definitely suspicious in terms of UI design there.
We had a couple of questions related to the camera. So Spark, you may be able to answer this. Is there any way that an app can use both cameras at the same time on any versions of Android? I think the answer is no. But
Honestly, I haven't tried it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it would be the contextual action bar.
Yes.
No clue.
That's not helpful, right?
Yeah, I don't know. The thing is, like, even after Honeycomb or as of Honeycomb, as of Ice Cream Sandwich, where the context menu is really a contextual action bar, and you can still kind of drag the handles around. That may be easier.
But even then, it might not be in the cursor position until after you've selected an action.
Right.
I think probably the best solution here that we can give is take a look at the source code for how copy is implemented. The copy or cut actions.
Or even the add to dictionary, like if the context menu as it is now, if the base class is doing it, then you should be able to read the base class and see how it's doing it.
Yeah, so again, a really good resource is to take a look at the Android code because it's all available online, and just take a look and see how we do things. Because I'll let you know a secret, and we do the same thing. So, we'll certainly go and try and look it up and see if we can get some more information for you. But generally speaking, that's what I'd recommend is just take a look and see how we do it in the existing framework classes.
Cool. Let's see, we're almost out of time, but I think we have a couple of questions left. No, this is the one that Michael asked earlier, so we are pretty much covered, I think.
And we have 3 minutes left, too, so good timing.
Yeah, is anyone on the live chat who would like to ask a question? Oh, Matthew's pinged one to us. Yeah. Can anyone suggest a good Bluetooth example that is current and works? I've noticed a lot of examples that no longer properly work because of API changes, including the ones that develop at Android.
Like Bluetooth chat?
So yes.
Yeah, the Bluetooth chat one.
Yeah, that's a bug.
Yeah, that's news to me. We should definitely look into that.
Can you help us out? Let us know what isn't working, and that will improve the rate at which it gets fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be able to go into it right now. I'd have to get back into the project and refresh myself. But
Is there a specific device where it's not working?
no, it was many devices. I was able to search for devices. I was able to try to start the connection, but it wouldn't hold a connection to the device.
If we could get something posted to Stack Overflow and a reference to it, I'd love to. Let's look into that and see if we can sort it out.
Yeah, cool. I can do that.
Perfect. Cool. Appreciate that. Michael, yeah, if you've got a question, by all means, fire it off.
Yeah, so I have a more general question. So I mentioned our other app is a music player, and I'm wondering in ICS what stuff has been done to sound. I've looked through the docs a bit, but I mean, I guess what I'm thinking about is more of like the deep down stuff that might not make the features list. Like, for instance, response time. I know that's kind of been lagging for a while. Has there been work on that? I don't know, just any of you guys have any, know anything about the sound in Android would be, or particularly what's happened in ICS?
Yeah, I mean, at the framework level, I mean, there's obviously the new remote control client stuff, and we've definitely fixed a lot of bugs in audio focus, and actually specifically audio focus, there are a lot of bugs fixed. But I mean, in terms of like lower level things like audio flinger or like audio latency or things like that, I mean, there's not really like much detail we can talk about. Just I don't think that we have the level of of knowledge there right now. I'd say that it's really just a constantly improving thing. There's definitely more that we more fixes we have planned in the realm of audio. It's just I don't know how much detail we can really have.
I guess like specifically stuff. Are you guys like working on, for instance, integrating gapless into like an IC dot release, or is that a an Android 5 thing? What about like crossfade? Like stuff. I'm talking about sort of the iOS comparisons, because iOS is still pretty far ahead of Android in terms of like low-level sound and just sound performance in general.
Well, we've also made some improvements to OpenSLES in the NDK. I think there's things like audio decode, but specifically around the things you mentioned, gapless and things like that, we can't really discuss future plans at all. But obviously we want to ensure that Android stays competitive in all areas, including audio, but we can't really go into details on what's planned, unfortunately.
Is that a way of saying that it isn't fixed in ICS yet?
Well, there's that. So there are definitely gaps. Funny gapless gap. There are definitely issues that we know of internally around both bugs and feature requests from a lot of our developers. So those things are on our minds. It's really just what can we do and when and yeah. It's not really much we can talk about roadmap-wise.
All right, that takes us to just over 3 o'clock. So I'd like to thank everyone who joined us live to ask questions. It's always a bit braver. And to everyone who asked questions on the comments and everywhere else. It's always fun. We'll be back at the same time next week. And we in fact have a hangout scheduled for tomorrow as well. So there'll be details on exactly what that's going to cover on the Android Developers Plus page. So if you're not already following that, please do. In the meantime, thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Dan.
Peace out.
Peace out.